add an interesting sort of arts dimension at some point of the debate. For people who don't know Doncaster particularly well, heading into COVID, there was actually some interesting data, some Centre for Cities that said we were actually the fourth fastest growing economy in the UK for private sector job creation. That is absolutely, I acknowledge, from a comparatively low base, but over a 10-year period, a range of big infrastructure projects, Doncaster Sheffield Airport, investment in our racecourse, French Gate Shopping Centre, infrastructure schemes like the Great Yorkshire Way, had started to give us some real positivity and momentum. And actually, we were starting to tip beyond just the big, shiny projects stuff to actually the whole more educated, more cultured, more livable city stuff, actually. And one of the things with my theatre chairmanship hat on that was particularly saddening about COVID, we cancelled the performance of the Royal Ballet in Doncaster this July. That was meant to be the Royal Ballet's only performance outside of London this calendar year, and if we're bringing that kind of stuff to Doncaster, it shows the kind of things we can do for places that, might previously have been characterised as left behind. Clearly, COVID has changed lots of stuff for all of us, and the impact on Doncaster's economy will, of course, be vast. And it betrays the fact that, whilst we've been doing...
So apologies to cut you off in full throw. Unfortunately, Lucy's going to have to leave us in a second, but her and her colleague, Brona, were going to just say a couple of quick things before she has to leave us.
Of course.
I'm going to come back to you. Is that okay? The vagary of Zoom and me not following the agenda properly, which is entirely my fault. So I was going to go to Lucy and Brona as a double act.
Amazing.
In the interests of getting some of our great business voices in, we're going to kind of do that in a sort of a more kind of exciting way than normal. So Lucy, do you want to say a few things and Brona say a few things to follow up the kind of the words we had particularly earlier from your chief exec Tristia, for those who are on the line, which were really quite inspirational, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think thank you so much, and again apologies that I'm going to have to run away. I think look, the current climate has taught us so much, and I think we've seen the power of digital connectivity. We've seen the power of human beings coming together and working together. And as far as TalkTalk's concerned, so we're headquartered in Salford, we have absolutely seen the spirit of the North and the Northern Powerhouse full throttle. And I think it's really incumbent on all of us to keep that fight going. And I think thank you to Lord Heseltine for those really passionate words earlier, because we do have to keep on making that case, particularly now as we face such a huge economic challenge, and we all need to keep on reminding the government of its commitments to level up and to keep a real focus on that. I think a couple of things that I'll point out from our perspective. I think specialism and focusing on those areas of excellence where there is creativity, digital, the reason that we are based up in Salford is precisely because of that specialism in digital and the creative industries. And so I think it's really important to harness that. I also think as we come out of the lockdown and start rebuilding, it's also important to remember digital infrastructure outperformed the recovery after 2008 significantly. So I think we've got to focus where we know there is room for growth. And I think as far as businesses are concerned and what we can do, Henry, you said it's about what we can do ourselves rather than always necessarily looking at government handouts. I think we as businesses can absolutely step in and help people. We can help people get connected, both in terms of kit, but also understanding. Lots of people, different generations who haven't had to use digital connectivity before, all of a sudden in the way we are now, socially distanced and everything else, people need to be able to log on and understand how to do that, and we can absolutely help. But what we can also do is help people adapt to the changed circumstances from a business perspective. So we are seeing a huge demand for people to have really stable business grade connectivity at home. So we are installing Ethernet connections and full fibre lines to individuals and businesses who have moved their businesses to work from home suddenly. And I think that being able to adapt quickly and being able to change the way we do things is really critical to everything going forward. and I'm going to hand over to Brona now. Perhaps you can touch on something around skills, the brilliant universities in the local area that we do work with. I mean, there's a huge amount that we can get into.
Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah, that's great. And because the two of us, we don't get double the time, so don't worry about that. But the only thing I'd like to follow up on just what Lucy said, I think it was particularly around that point of kind of northern specialisms. And everyone here is from an area that has a particular specialism. We know in the northeast you've got kind of the great energy base, and that is the potential to grow. And from our perspective in the northwest, I think that was a big part of us. Well, we began in the northwest and we've grown with it, and then that's why it made sense for us to make that our headquarters. And I think we think there's a big role for skills development there, and having the right skills base for those local specialisms. That's how they grow, and that's actually how they will continue to exist. And I think that goes back to Lord Heseltine's point around how people on the ground just know what's needed and know the different levers to pull to get there. So I think for us, we see that role of digital specialism really coming through in terms of the skills. We have some good relationships with the local universities, in particular Salford University and the University of 92, and we just think actually continuing those links between businesses, between universities and further education will be really important for us. And I guess one thing I'd say is actually what local government and national government can do there is help us do that. We try our best, but we don't know everything about education, and it takes a lot of resource, and we try to understand more. So I think actually the more that a body like the Mayor, like the great work that's happening in Salford, that they can bring us along and help us navigate that would actually really help us. So I just think that was kind of something I'd love to talk today about, how businesses can be better involved and actually pay more attention and go further. Oh, Henry, I think I must have muted you at some point.
That's fine. No, I mean, my own team would love the ability to mute me at the moment permanently. I think they're quite disappointed.
Wasn't me.
But it isn't a feature that comes in a face-to-face environment. And Dan is a good friend of mine, and so will not be too upset with me for having cut him off in his prime. But I think we were talking about how great Doncaster was, which is pretty much how every conversation I have with you usually begins, Dan. So I think we'll have to take it. I hope people will have remembered that when you start speaking again, because they should remember it now, and they should remember it always, I think is the message to leave people with today, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so, Henry. But actually what I was about to do was bring myself and everyone else crashing to the ground with the sobering reality of where we are with the economy. And I think my comment from a Doncaster point of view was, in spite of the strides we've made, this is actually just exposing that underlying fragility of a low-skilled economy that has yet got decades of work to do. And I think the sobering reality for the economy overall is that every government intervention that's been made this last 4 months is yet to save a single job or a single business. All it's done is preserve the opportunity that some might be saved. And I think we've got some very, very dark days ahead. Our own economic data shows about 80% of our members say they're trading significantly below capacity, which is just a hint of the jobs crisis that is to come. And clearly we know that's going to hit very, very hard on 16 to 24-year-olds, but actually the over 50s as well. And we know in that demographic, less people will lose their jobs. Few of them overall will find their way back into work, that 16 to 24-year-old overall. And so my sort of observation would be then, reflecting back on last week's summer statement, of just how lukewarm the reaction to that has been from the business community, actually. And I think it's characterised more by what wasn't in it than what was, and lots of missed opportunities. And to some of the earlier points and the purpose of today, it felt like it was absolutely silent on place, in giving places the power to deliver the things we need to deliver to recover and renew our economies. And then with the theme of education and skills, for me, whether it's nationally led stuff or locally led stuff, my concern is that everything feels quite supply side. But at the moment, it's about sort of getting people into jobs when those jobs are highly unlikely to exist. So I feel as though as a country and economy, we need far, far more on sort of stimulating demand, rebooting business confidence, consumer confidence, and actually getting at stuff as we've said lots and lots of times already, to be grounded in place, grounded in optimism and the ambition and the assets we've got, rather than the classic Northern empty cap, Lisa, can we have some more kind of approach? And I think lastly, I suppose to end on a slight positive, one of the things that I have been heartened about throughout the COVID period is the return in regard for business communities and what SMEs look like, and what, you know, businesses of all shapes and sizes do for our communities and people. And so my plea would be that as devolution comes and as powers comes, we utilise all of the assets, and that's the entirety of our business communities, in sort of rebuilding and reimagining what comes next.
Thank you, Dan. I think that's been a really stimulating discussion. We've certainly got some great comments on the chat, and obviously people can also use the Q&A function, but do send us some comments on the chat as well if you want those brought in. I'm conscious we've got Councillor Elise Wilson with us, who leads on the economy for Greater Manchester, one of the members of, I suppose, the most famous combined authority, the first, Greater Manchester, and there's nothing wrong with that. Elise is with us, but I'm not sure if she's able to ask a question or make a contribution, because she may be listening in and in the middle of something else. But if she is available, Elise, can you hear us? Are you able to say anything? It'd be really great to get your insights if you can share anything, and then we'll get some questions from Charlotte Morris from Salford University, and then a few others as well. Are you there, Elise? I'm not sure. Elise, you're live. Have you got anything you want to add, or should we come back to you later?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you. And if you turn your video on, we can see you. But as I've picked on you, don't feel obliged to put your camera on. The etiquette is that you can just speak if you prefer, because I'm conscious that we didn't warn you.
I'm on a device that isn't straightforward. It isn't clear how to put the camera on. So my apologies.
You're pretty inspirational just in audio, from when Lisa and I were with each other yesterday talking to another group of people in another Zoom meeting about these same issues. So I was struck by Elise's passion and some of her positivity, right, about what could be achieved despite the challenges that Lord Heseltine outlined, that we all, I think, would agree with. So Elise, as a practitioner, right, as someone who is at the forefront of making devolution work, and not just like me being a cheerleader for it, what would your thoughts be on the conversation this afternoon? It'd be lovely to get your reflections.
Oh, wow. I found it a really interesting conversation, and you know, we're right that we're facing a huge challenge and a massive crisis, not just this global pandemic and this health crisis that we've got at the moment, but also the renegotiation of our relationship with the EU, what our space is going to look like on a global scale, and where does the North fit in on that. So I think, you know, the North could play a really big part in making sure that Britain flourishes going forward, whatever happens. But it is only able to do that if the government is prepared to work with us on our ideas, because devolution and the Northern Powerhouse, it has to be by the North and for the North, and it can't just be some kind of something that's dictated to us. And we have ideas and we have potential here to not just see growth and inclusive growth, but also resilient communities, and seeing that feed into not just the Metro Mayor combined authorities, but right into the corners of the North that maybe don't already have the Metro Mayors, maybe don't already have the combined authorities, but ensuring that we can take everybody with us. And we know that because it's where we represent, it's what we're doing, it's where we know. And I think it's about, we're here, we're sat at the table, and I'd be saying to government, come join us, you know, come and find out, because we've got ideas, we know what we're doing, we've been planning on this, we've been working on this. I know Tim mentioned earlier, you know, and yourself about Richard, you know, Lees, and obviously as a fellow member of Greater Manchester Combined Authority, you know, Greater Manchester, we've had that vision for a long time about what we want. And I don't think that that's necessarily different for other places. I just think other places need to be given the platform to articulate what's right for them. And some of these smaller areas find that, very difficult. But I think if the North can come together in a collective voice, we can make a big difference. I think infrastructure is going to be key, but I think skills is a big way forward of getting ourselves through. How can we know our people, we know what's going on in our local economies, we know where the growth is going to be. We can divert we can divert the budgets and interrupt what's happening if we have that devolved to us, and really help make sure people can keep jobs or find new jobs in areas of growth, and really make that difference. But without it being it must be a place-based approach. It must be the North doing it for the North, and then all the neighbourhoods, if you like, all the regions within the North doing their own thing that's right for them, and really taking that place-based approach to what is ultimately, I think, going to see us be successful and really make the difference for the whole of the UK.
Lord Heseltine, I'm conscious I'm going to bring in as many of our other speakers and panellists. We've got another question about to come from Charlotte Morris from Salford University. So very Salford heavy discussion, which is never a bad thing. Great part of the North. So Charlotte's going to join us in a second. But I wondered, Lord Heseltine, clearly many of the issues that Councillor Wilson was talking about, and the kind of Greater Manchester experience, very much on the same theme as your comments. What would be your take on what she was saying, and particularly around devolution expanding? Because I think this morning, Simon Clarke, who is albeit the Minister for Levelling Up, not a cabinet minister as yet, but perhaps he might be one day, but he was very much promising devolution for the whole of the North. So metro mayors for every part of, and he is reducing the number of councils, so busy abolishing district councils in Cumbria, in North Yorkshire, upsetting his own Conservative colleagues in the process, and rightly so, I would argue. Do you think that we might be returning a little bit to the George Osborne spirit if we can get on with some of that? It's not as much as having put the existing mayors at the heart of the recovery, but might getting to a point where we have a mayor for every part of the North, would that, do you think, help to mobilise the North collectively by having those genuinely democratic voices that could together, not just in the cities but everywhere, drive change and be the ones to set the agenda with government?
Well, I have not heard this announcement today, and when I do, if it's as you report, and I'm sure Elise wouldn't have said it if it weren't true, then it will be a joy to my heart. But let me say this, you've got to have a mayor of a meaningful authority. And so I have not the slightest doubt that unitary counties with mayors, that would be a vehicle where it is not a conurbation authority. Where there are conurbations, then it should be a mayoral authority. My own view, for what it's worth, I know it's controversial, I would have gone for a Greater Yorkshire. We heard from the case for the Humber. Of course, the Humber is a very important part of the British economy. And I would give my eye teeth to travel the world saying, I am the mayor of Yorkshire. What a brand, what a reputation across the world. And that brings Sheffield and Leeds and the Humber and North Yorkshire into one, and so it should be. And all that stops it are frankly, the personal images and attitudes and practices and assumptions of the people involved at council level. They're at war with each other for historic reasons, as they have been all my life. And until you break that, you will never get that unity of purpose and that coherence of economic strength. So I'm not in favor of devolving to meaningless, small, councillor-driven authorities. I want leadership as mayors present. I want economies which are strong enough to diversify, to create a community, to build cities where people want to live, enjoy being, want to invest, feel a loyalty towards. So, but there's one other thing I would like to say, and you won't misunderstand me. No one is keener on the agenda that you're discussing here in the North today. You're not going to win this argument if you think that London is going to have no equivalent strength. What about the West Midlands? What about Bristol and the West Country? What about the north of this country, northeast of our country? These are all areas that have got to be given the same sort of devolved opportunities so that they themselves can deploy, and you will gain. The stronger they are, the stronger you will be, because we are an integrated economy. In the end, there's one government in England, and that must be reflected in the devolution agenda. So, and there's one other thing I would say, and I can look all of you in the eye with that wonderful advantage called hindsight. I am 87 years of age, and I've lived too long, some would say, but anyway, enough to remember. When I first went into the House of Commons, the National Farmers Union could change the mind of government in a weekend. Government said something that farmers didn't like on a Friday. The members of Parliament went back to their constituencies on the Friday, Saturday, and there was a phone call. Dear Member of Parliament, we would like to meet you to discuss the latest government announcement. We suggest Saturday afternoon in such and such a part of your constituency. There would be 10 angry farmers. The questions would start politely, they would get increasingly pointed, and by the end of a very short meeting, someone would say, Mr. Member of Parliament, we've listened to your excuses. We've come to the conclusion you don't really care about the farming interests in this constituency. And sadly, we've had to brief the local press to this effect. Now, you wonder why I raised the National Farmers Union, because that was how local opinion changed the minds of members of Parliament. And the question I put to you is this: why aren't your members of Parliament in the House of Commons, effectively, virtually, and saying to the government, we've had enough. You are going to devolve power, and we're not going to vote for you unless you do. And how long do you think a government could resist the combined voice of the members of Parliament of your region? I'd give them 24 hours. So why aren't you doing exactly what the National Farmers Union did to people like me 50 years ago? Make it happen if you really want it to happen.
Thank you for that, Lord Heseltine. I think that's a very clear action for us, and I think certainly there are certainly members of Parliament on all sides actually of the party boundaries who have made this mission central to what they want from either their own government or from their period in opposition. I think how we mobilise those people, but they are not everyone, Lord Heseltine. I would say they are the committed devolutionists are the kind of, and the active ones are the Mike Amesburys and the Kevin Hollingrakes, the Catherine McKinnells and the kind of those, and they're not every MP. Not every MP is as active on that space as they could be.
Can I reply to that?
Of course, yeah.
Why don't you do something about that?
Well,
have a nice friendly chat with them. Explain the reality of the fact that how sad it is that your period as Member of Parliament may not be replaced in the forthcoming election. Awfully sad, old boy, or old girl. That's the way it is.
So I think on that note, and I think that's certainly Jill likes these events to have a call to action. I don't think we'll need to devise one of those at the end of the session. I think we've had our call to action really clearly. Charlotte Morris from the University of Salford is joining us. I'm also going to try and bring in Jane Thomas in our remaining 12 minutes. So we're going to keep it snappy and get answers to Charlotte's question, and then Jane and I and others who disagree about the best way to achieve devolution in Yorkshire. So a fight for the Yorkshirists among us that Lord Heseltine has rightly started. A very friendly debate, I hasten to add, amongst people who all basically agree, but just disagree about tactics. So Charlotte, the floor is yours, and then we will come to Jane once those questions have been answered.
Thanks, Henry. Can everyone hear me? I wasn't expecting this. That's perfect. But it's not every day you get lobbying tips from Lord Heseltine, is it? So I'll take that one away with me. But I just wanted to come in really quickly on Brona's point, and thanks for the shout out for the university. her point on that collaboration between industry, higher education, further education, and being the driving force perhaps behind how we can come out of this with a stronger recovery. That's our MO at Salford. We collaborate with industry partners like Talk. You know, higher education it's driven by student demand, really. It's the courses that students want to do. So we have to then work with industry to ensure that those courses are meeting the needs of employers to help our graduates get jobs and contribute, you know, to the economy. But my question was actually in response to Dan's point on the state of the economy and whether the panelists know or are considering whether there's been any analysis on the impact of COVID on the northern economy and those regional economies within the north to a lesser or greater extent than other regions. If we're not, are we lobbying for some kind of analysis of that nature? And what do we think, therefore, the solutions are, perhaps, in terms of government intervention and also maybe regional government that are tailored to those economies? And as I think Brona and Lucy were talking about, specialisms within those economies, because the Chancellor has put a lot of money into the economy. He's effectively nationalised it for a little while, but it is just staving off what is going to come, and perhaps that one-size-fits-all from HMP isn't the best approach as we go forward. So just interested in everyone's thoughts on that. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. Cheers.
I'm going to ask for volunteers from the panel, but then I will pick on my friends amongst you, of which many of you are, so be wary. I was going to start with you, Sarah, in terms of the kind of analysis point, but also probably ask you, Daffyd, how much tonnage is coming across the quay, right? Because that's something you can't hide, and a bit of an understanding of how our export and our trading position is going in terms of the current period. So Sarah, do you want to come in first?
Yeah, thanks. I think one of the frustrating things about this crisis is the sort of mismatch between the urgency with which we need to plan and the availability of data broken down at a regional and at a city regional level, so that we can start to kind of really understand the full impact. However, having said that, we know from things like the labour force survey that there is evidence that levels of unemployment and new redundancies are higher, particularly in cities in the northeast and in parts of Yorkshire as well. We also know that the coronavirus has disproportionately affected deprived areas very significantly, and the north has a higher proportion of areas of deprivation compared with the rest of the UK. So we can be fairly certain that some of those inequalities in terms of low pay, in terms of health, in terms of educational divides, that this will have a further negative impact on those areas, and so will have knock-on effects for the local economy. And we also know anecdotally that there are reports of high levels of people getting laid off particularly in Yorkshire as a result of the kind of furlough scheme starting to come to an end, and evidence that a lot of companies have really had a difficult time. And nationally, we know that, compared even to the Office for Budget Responsibilities figures, the impact on hospitality particularly has far exceeded the original forecasts. And that's got a really serious impact for many parts of the north that are very reliant on tourism and hospitality. And of course, many of those jobs are typically lower paid and often employ women as well. So that's I think a serious issue for the north. We know that already that even before the crisis, 1 in 4 people were earning less than the real living wage of £9 an hour. 1 in 3 women earning less than the real living wage. So I think, yeah, it's not a happy picture. You know, we're going to see levels of unemployment rise sharply in the coming months. We're going to see some of those inequalities we already had in terms of deprivation, in terms of low pay, further widened. And we're going to need a much better connection between employment support and the skills system to make sure that we're helping people in the early stages from when they lose their job to get into at least transitional employment in the short term, because we know from previous crises, the longer people are out of work, then the more difficult and the more expensive it is to actually get them back into earning a wage again. So that's some thoughts from us, but I think the crucial point is about that mismatch in terms of data availability and trying to work with the ONS to get that information as soon as we can.
So, Brona, I was actually going to come to you next, and then I'll come to Daffy, who I'm also going to throw some questions around the jobs potential of accelerated decarbonisation to, which is a question from Simon Bowens on the chat. So, Brona, do you want to come in first, and then I'll get Daffy to do two questions at the same time?
And I just thought, in response to Charlotte's question, looking at what is kind of the local response, and how can we have a northern response to this? And I know everyone expects us to do this because we do bang on about digital infrastructure a lot, but I think one of the questions we get asked is, why is this a northern issue? Why isn't this just a national issue? But I think why we think it's relevant to the question about rebuilding in the north is because there's kind of a prize to be won by the region that is able to kind of move fastest on this. And I think digital is one, because we're at the cusp of a kind of a next wave of investment and infrastructure laying down. I think actually, so we're, nationally there's only about 11% coverage, and that's kind of spread across the country. So it's not that there's a particular strength in one area or the other. And there's actually a chance for the region that can move quickly on this can actually take a lead and be the first one to really become a digital powerhouse. And we think actually if kind of the government's levelling up agenda is to mean anything, this is exactly the type of infrastructure project that should be prioritised and should be made to be a northern issue. And we all know, everyone on this call will know somebody who's struggled over the past few weeks and months because they're in a digital nut spot, they can't get super fast broadband, or it's rained outside and everything slowed down. And I think actually we're at a real kind of point now where the north could be the first region to really increase its numbers, to be at the forefront of it, and then be able to get those first jobs. And in the short term, that is actually, there's tens of thousands of jobs to be made in construction of a new infrastructure network. But then in the long term, I think Lucy mentioned earlier, after 2008, the digital and creative industries was far outpaced the rest of the economy in bringing new jobs into regions. And that's why we think actually this is the chance for the north to kind of get that ahead of other people.
We've only got 4 minutes, so I'm going to bring Daffyd in to quickly give us an answer on decarbonisation. Then I'm going to give Jane the opportunity to quickly raise her question on One Yorkshire in the context of the Devo stuff, and then we are going to finish at a hard stop at 3 o'clock. So Daffyd, could you come in? And then Dan Fell, there's a question on the Q&A from Javaria Hussein about SMEs. So I'm going to give you some homework to do and get you to give an answer on the typing side, if you can, just so we can try and get as much of the questions answered as we can.
Thanks, Henry. In true politician style, I'm glad you asked me that question. I'm going to answer a slightly different one just before I come into that, because I stayed very quiet on the devolution thing, which, as you alluded to, I'm passionate about. But one of the things is, this is a personal observation, but one of the things, I completely support the Greater Yorkshire proposal, but it seems to be dead in the water and has been for some time. We've suffered a similar thing in the Humber. Associated British Ports strongly backed a Humber devolution proposal that didn't go, and both of them are founded on the fact that, as Lord Heseltine said, it's local politicians who have got in the way for particularly parochial issues. The challenge, I think, it needs to be one that goes back to government as well, to say, actually, sometimes there is a role, ironically, for the government to step in and say, we're going to bang heads together and come to a solution on this, because actually, from an economic point of view, the right outcome is this. And not the more parochial issues that you come up with. To go back to your question about what's happening over the quayside, which is the one that you originally posed, we did see at the peak of the COVID crisis during the lockdown a quite significant drop-off in the volume of ships coming into the port. So typically on a normal day around these times of year, we would be seeing around 50 to 60 pilotage acts of us manoeuvring vessels in and out of ports into the Humber. That dropped to a daily average of around 30, so more or less down by half. That number's picked up, so there are some signs of recovery. The numbers are roughly around to 45, 46 pilot acts of ships coming in a day, but it's still below where it should be, and there is going to be a long-term impact on that. And then the question on decarbonisation, it is really clear there are masses of industries, certainly concentrated in the Humber, where they're big carbon users. Bringing in new technology is a way to make sure we have a greener economy, but actually also that there are skilled jobs that are there for the future. And some of the great examples of what's been going on in offshore wind are the ways you can grow the economy, but do so also not always with public sector investments. So if you look at what's happened with Greenport Hull, that's virtually entirely private sector investment of, you know, £310 million project, only £10 million of which came from the public sector. But the right incentives were put in place, and the government were assisting in bringing the investment to be levered in. So I think that's partly a model for the future. Put the right incentive packaging together, and then let private sector come in and invest.
So Jane, I think you're on mute, but do you want to give us a quick 30-second one Yorkshire kind of question? And
yeah, okay.
We'll try and wrap up on a Devo theme, and I think with the panel we've got, talking Devo is the right thing to talk. So Jane, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'd just like to pick up something that Lord Heseltine said, which was, I would give my eyes teeth to say I'm the Mayor of Yorkshire. Well, you know, I'll fight you for that one. But I think you raised some quite interesting points about the lobbying abilities of our MPs. And I would just say that sort of the emergency planning and emergency response that we've had to do for COVID has really made us think about scale. And I do think that in these COVID times, that scale and response can only really be met at a regional level. And Daffod, you are right about it being off the table, I think. But in earlier sessions today, people have talked about ambitions and aspirations. Judith Blake talked about that in spades. And I don't think we should forget that we should still keep this aspiration going, because it's about genuine devolution. And what we're being offered, as Lord Heseltine quite rightly says, this is not devolution. This is something that has been picked. It's almost come from the American model. And if we want to have proper levelling up, we are going to have to look at proper devolution. And that is about having the right scale to get that devolution, and not to be given this scraps, piecemeal devolution by the government, which to me feels a bit like divide and rule. We'll just give people bits here and there, but it's not going to give us the tools that we really need for all those aspirations that have been mentioned today.
And I think we could probably do a whole hour on this topic, Jane. And I could see Sarah and others nodding. I think I was going to finish just by saying something, which is I don't disagree with your passion, and I was going to limit this conversation to those of us who live in Yorkshire or work in Yorkshire, because Lord Heseltine's already had his, quite rightly had his say, and others I'm sure would agree with him what he said. I think I'd give my arm to have a woman Metro Mayor when we elect a mayor in West Yorkshire next year. I don't want another man sitting representing our country in the north and speaking for us, because my wife and kids are not men or male, and I don't think that the people who lead the north should all be men. And I say that as someone who's a recovering politician who lives in West Yorkshire. So as I'm talking myself out of a job. But the thing I would also say is I agree with you completely, Jane, about powers. And I think the only question I would leave, and I think so, I'm an agglomerationist, but I also believe at the moment that Yorkshire is not a functional economic area. Leeds has more in common with Manchester than it does with other parts of Yorkshire, and that is the kind of the riposte from the agglomerationist and the metro economic thinkers. But what I don't have is the passion and the zeal of people who support One Yorkshire. And as the person who led the campaign for a regional development agency to become a regional assembly in Yorkshire, of which I was a supporter, and you ran, Jane, if you can't be passionate about it, no one can, right? So, but I say that as that I agree with 95% of what you're saying, and I don't think One Yorkshire's ever going to happen. And there are 10 other things I want more than it, right? But I'm only one person, and I'm in the minority. I think most people would disagree with me, and I accept that. But I have a slightly technocratic reason for why I disagree, not a political or a social one, because I think that Yorkshire identity is at least as strong as Northern identity, but I'm not trying to create a pan-Northern Parliament. And if I did, or someone tried to, they'd have to get people as be excited about the North as they are about being from Yorkshire. So I've taken my chair's prerogative and really abused it there. So we've broken every Zoom etiquette and kept you past your finish time. I would argue, never mind a mini summit, this has been an incredibly interesting conversation. And when we are all allowed to do this in person again, I really look forward to this event being physical, as it first was in Leeds, when Jill first put it together when we launched as NPP our first education report, following much of the brilliant work that Sarah and our colleague Anna had done on education and young people from IPPR North. And those of us who do thinking and write things really appreciate the work of Devo Connect in helping to allow some of that work when it's launched to be shared, but also to allow a debate. And I think particularly those of you who have joined us today, this morning and this afternoon, we really appreciate you sparing the time. I'm sorry we have kept you 4 minutes longer than we said we would, but you have stayed diligently to hear what people have had to say. And particularly thanks to all of those who have come on the line, who have taken part and have persevered despite the challenges of doing this the way we are. We certainly want to keep on campaigning and fighting, particularly for many of the things that Lord Heseltine was saying we should. And I think that the debates and the reality that the government has not yet realised what it has promised us is absolutely front and centre. And we have centralised Whitehall-based structures that decide our policies in most of the areas we've talked about today. It is not possible to bring about real change unless you rebalance that power. I think that's the insight I would say that I think everyone who's on this panel and others have said in different ways, right? But that has going to have to change quite quickly, because the way in which the government chooses for us to recover could stymie devolution and decentralisation for another decade, and that cannot be allowed to happen. So the urgency of Lord Heseltine, I think, really weighs on all of us. And thank you so much for being part of today, particularly to our great panel, who are all incredibly interesting individuals, and we could have all heard a lot more from them. So thank you to all of them, and thank you to all of you. And I look forward to seeing you all in person and again virtually very soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Henry.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Henry.